This is BBC News with the latest headlines for viewers in the UK and around the world. I'm Victoria Derbyshire. Hello, here are the headlines. All care home residents and staff who have coronavirus symptoms in the UK will now be tested as the government tries to tackle the rising number of infections and deaths in care homes.
We've been working really hard to do whatever we can to protect those receiving care from this truly awful, horrible illness.
President Trump suspends funding for the World Health Organization, accusing it of covering up the spread of the virus in China.
The reality is that the WHO failed to adequately obtain, vet, and share information in a timely and transparent fashion.
The UK's Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, urges the government to show the public there is a plan and publish its strategy for ending the coronavirus lockdown. Nursery and primary schools have reopened across Denmark as the country gradually begins to ease coronavirus restrictions. And he set out to collect £1,000 for the NHS. Live on air this morning, he has topped £5 million. Veteran Captain Tom smashes his target with the help of the world.
Well, at the moment...
Hang on, you've done it, you've done it, you've done it, you've done it. You've reached, people have donated over 5 million. Oh my gosh, you've done it, Tom. Woo! That is absolutely extraordinary.
Completely out of this world.
Hello and welcome to audiences in the UK and around the world. We're covering all the latest coronavirus developments here in Britain and globally. Our top story. The UK government has promised that all care home residents and staff with COVID-19 symptoms will be tested. It comes after weeks of calls from care providers for more testing and warnings that the virus is running wild amid outbreaks at more than 2,000 care homes. So that promise then? The British government says all care home residents and staff with virus symptoms will be tested as lab capacity increases. The government says the Care Quality Commission, the CQC, is coordinating the effort to ramp up testing in care homes and will offer tests to the UK's 30,000 care providers by the end of the week. And today, the UK Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, urged the government to go further and publish an exit strategy from the coronavirus lockdown. Sir Keir said his party would support the government if, as expected, it extends lockdown measures later this week. But he called for more transparency about how and when the rules will be relaxed. Elsewhere in the US, President Trump says he has instructed his government to suspend funding for the World Health Organization, accusing it of accelerating the coronavirus pandemic and being biased towards China. And in Denmark, the government there begins to reopen daycare centres and primary schools after a month-long closure due to the virus. Children are being kept further apart than usual. Schools must implement strict cleaning regimes, and where possible, lessons are to be held outside. Keith Doyle reports now on the situation in care homes in England and the news that residents and staff with symptoms will now be tested for COVID-19.
We'll be there with you.
With no family allowed to visit their care home, it's care workers that read the last messages from loved ones.
For now, Grandma, this is goodbye. But I know that you will always be with us in our hearts.
We've all got on with it and done what we can. And I can sleep well at night knowing that I did give them all the love and care that I could in their last moments.
The exact number of deaths of care home residents due to coronavirus is unclear. There has not been routine testing, something care homes have been calling for. The government has now said it will test all care home residents and staff in England with symptoms. It's also said all new residents discharged from hospital into care homes will be tested. Further details will be in the Social Care Action Plan to be revealed later this week, with 30,000 care providers expected to be contacted by the end of the week, according to the government. Deaths in care homes are not included in the official government figures. The latest number of deaths of people with COVID-19 in hospital has risen by 778, bringing the total to 12,107. The cost of the virus has also been laid bare. The economy could shrink by 35% by June, according to the Independent Office of Budget Responsibility, with the effects felt by everyone.
These are tough times, and there will be more to come. As I've said before, we can't protect every business and every household.
Labour says it's critical that the government gets the measures right, but MPs believe it's struggling to get some of them in place.
I've no doubt that government is being bold. It has come forward with the right basic approach, but because it's having to happen at pace and a great scope, it is clearly struggling in some areas.
Getting businesses back open, getting people back to work, getting care workers tested, getting through this pandemic. These are the challenges facing the government and the country in the weeks ahead. Keith Doyle, BBC News.
China has urged the United States to fulfil its obligations to the World Health Organization after President Trump suspended its funding. Mr. Trump accused the WHO of failing to adequately assess the outbreak when it first emerged in the Chinese city of Wuhan, even though in January he himself praised China's response and downplayed the danger of the virus at home. Total deaths in the US have now reached 28,300. Peter Bowes reports.
The President of the United States.
Addressing reporters in the Rose Garden at the White House, President Trump said the United States was making substantial progress against the coronavirus. He could see light at the end of the tunnel. But it was time to call an end to America's support for the World Health Organization.
Today I'm instructing my administration to halt funding of the World Health Organization while a review is conducted to assess the World Health Organization's role in severely mismanaging and covering up the spread of the coronavirus. Everybody knows what's going on there.
Mr. Trump said the WHO had promoted what he called China's disinformation, leading to a wider outbreak of the virus than would otherwise have occurred. He claimed the disease could have been contained at its source with very little death if the UN agency had objectively assessed the situation on the ground.
There was credible information to suspect human-to-human transmission in December 2019, which should have spurred the WHO to investigate immediately.
Responding to the president's announcement, the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said it's not the time to reduce the resources for the operations of the WHO or any other humanitarian organisation in the fight against the virus. It's my belief that the WHO must be supported, as it is absolutely critical to the world's efforts to win the war against COVID-19. Critics in Washington say the president is trying to deflect blame for the spread of the pandemic in the US. The Trump administration has been criticised for a lack of early testing for the virus and for playing down the threat of COVID-19. Peter Bowes, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Back to the UK, and the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, is urging the government to publish an exit strategy from the coronavirus lockdown this week. The government's expected to announce an extension to the lockdown on Thursday. Sir Keir said Labour would back such a move, but the government should be more open about how and when it will end. Let's talk again to Norman, our assistant political editor. Why does he want this published, Norman?
Because he thinks it is the big question and people need to be able to get to grips with it, really to give themselves a sense of hope and thereby to retain support for the lockdown, because his view is that people are to abide by the restrictions. They have to be given a sense of endgame of how we get out of this. Added to which he believes that when we look at the different measures, some of them are going to take quite a long time to put in place. If you go for some sort of national vaccination programme, you'll have to set up vaccination centres all around the country. That'll mean investment. It'll need a lot of planning. So let's get started now rather than leaving it till late in the day and it's all a bit of a rush. And lastly, just basic transparency. It is the big question. Let's talk about it. Now, to be fair, the government don't disagree with that. For them, it's just a question of timing. They argue that it's too early in terms of the science. We don't know quite what the sort of scientific data will tell us about what bits of the economy we can relax earlier than others, who we might be able to relax. But above all, because they take the view, if we start trying to formulate an exit strategy now, it sends out a very sort of conflicting message to people, because you are saying at one and the same time, please stay at home, but hey, let's talk about how you can leave home. And the fear is that's just rather counterproductive and may encourage people to think they can relax, they don't have to bother about the lockdown. Sir Keir Starmer's view is that more important is to have an open and frank conversation, and it's as well to have it early. And that was the argument he was making this morning.
We do need to take the public with us. We need the public to comply, and therefore they need to know that the government has a strategy for what comes next, and they need to know the government's planning for that. And I think if there's transparency and openness, you get the trust of the public. And if you get the trust of the public, it's like the compliance levels will go up. And that is a very good thing, because what the government is doing now to keep the infection rate down is the right thing, and we should support that.
The other truth, Vic, is I guess it's such a big decision that realistically the Prime Minister would have to be up and running again before it could be taken. So we know he's going to be in recuperation for another week, maybe several weeks. So that's the sort of time frame we're probably looking at before the government seeks to genuinely engage on the issue of an exit strategy. Elsewhere, their attention is focused on, if you like, the social care row. You remember yesterday we had those stark figures from some care home providers about the level of deaths and infections. Overnight, we've had a pledge from Matt Hancock, as we've heard, to provide testing for everyone in the care home, that's residents and staff, and all those moving from hospitals to care homes. The problem is, of course, that there just simply aren't enough tests to go around, frankly. The latest figure suggests just 14,000 tests. Those are overwhelmingly being focused on NHS staff. Albeit this morning, the Care Minister, Helen Whately, was insisting that the government had not taken its eye off the ball when it came to social care.
My message to them is that we are doing, and we have been doing, everything we can to protect those really vulnerable people who are living in care homes or receiving care at home. We know those are some of the most vulnerable in our society. And from the moment it looked like coronavirus was coming our way, on my part as the Care Minister, and working with the Department for Health and Social Care, local authorities, and there's thousands of care providers and their representatives, we've been working really hard to do whatever we can to protect those receiving care from this truly awful, horrible illness that is hitting the whole world and bringing the whole world to a standstill.
The difficulty, Vic, of course, is we know care homes are being hit hard, and the death rate in care homes seems to be increasing really very, very rapidly indeed. The level of testing is still, frankly, minimal. I think 500 care workers so far have been tested. They're now in the sort of midst of the crisis. So, no doubt care home leaders will welcome today's announcement, but I think above all, they will want to see Matt Hancock's words actually resulting in tests in their homes in the very, very near future.
Thanks very much, Norman. Thank you. At this time each day, we do get the figures from Spain on the latest numbers of those infected with coronavirus and the latest number of people who've died in Spain. So the total number of coronavirus cases in the country rises to 177,633. That's for the preceding 24 hours. And the numbers of people who have died, well, that has gone up again. On Tuesday, it was 18,056 people who died in Spain. Yesterday, they recorded 18,579 deaths. One of the first countries in Europe to impose a lockdown is easing restrictions from today. Children in Denmark are going back to primary and nursery schools 4 weeks after they were closed. Other restrictions on borders, leisure venues and gatherings of more than 10 people are going to stay in place. Our correspondent Adrian Murray is in Copenhagen.
Well, I think so far there's been quite widespread support for the measures that the government has brought in because it acted so quickly. And actually, the lockdown here is certainly a lot less restrictive than it is in places like the UK or France, for that matter. However, some parents, of course, understandably are feeling anxious about their children coming back to school first. Health experts say that it makes sense, though, because children appear to be a lot less susceptible to the virus.
And what's been the scale of the coronavirus infection rate in Denmark?
Well, the latest figures show that around 300 coronavirus-related deaths have been recorded and about 6,500 cases. Now, Denmark is a small country, but the health data have actually been quite encouraging. They think that the epidemic curve has started to flatten off at a relatively low level. Crucially, what that means is that the number of hospitalizations here have actually been falling since the start of April, and also the number of patients receiving intensive care or on respirators has also been falling over the last couple of weeks. So essentially that means that the hospitals have not been overwhelmed and there's still capacity to care for people going forwards.
Time to bring you the headlines here on BBC News. All care home residents and staff who have coronavirus symptoms in the UK will now be tested as the government tries to tackle the rising number of infections and deaths in care homes. President Trump suspends funding for the World Health Organization, accusing it of covering up the spread of the virus in China. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer urges the government to show the public there is a plan and publish its strategy for ending the coronavirus lockdown. Steve Leonard says regarding Labour's call for publishing a strategy for exiting the lockdown restrictions, it's far too early and the mainstream media, the MSM, should stop asking about an exit strategy. Whereas Jeffrey says to those of us with no income and hunger on the near horizon, publishing of this is a priority. As we've been hearing then, the UK government has now announced it will test all care home residents and staff who show symptoms of the virus, and that all new residents discharged from hospital into care homes will also be tested. Yesterday, the Office for National Statistics said 217 people had died in a care home setting, but those figures are 11 days out of date. Charities and care homes believe the figure is much higher. Graham Satchell has been speaking to workers at one care home where 16 residents have died with the virus.
These pictures were taken for us by care home staff. It looks normal, but what's happened here at Oak Springs in Liverpool is truly awful.
I can't tell you how hard it is to lose 16 residents. 16 residents in a space of 3 weeks is just completely devastating. And you don't have time to grieve for one, that you're losing another one and another one and another one. It's horrendous. It is absolutely heart-rending and horrendous.
Staff have been doing everything they can here to protect their residents, but there is a growing anger in the care sector, a feeling that they've been forgotten, from the supply of protective clothing to testing to counting the number of dead. Age UK are saying the current figures are airbrushing older people out like they don't matter. Do you think that's right?
Yes, I think what they're saying is right. We was very much bottom of the list, I feel, when the government was first aware of the coronavirus and the impact it would have on the country. I think care home and the care sector was very much at the bottom of the list.
The government says residents in care homes have not been forgotten, that protective clothing is being delivered. And today they've announced all residents and staff in care homes who need a test will be given one. But is it too late?
We've not been tested at all. Nobody in this care home have been tested. I do feel cross about that because I think we should be tested.
If you're not tested, you don't know, do you, whether you're bringing it in, whether you're taking it out?
No, you don't. But I took time off as a precaution to protect the residents from catching whatever I had.
I mean, if you're not tested, you're kind of flying blind, aren't you?
Yeah, you are, yeah.
At one stage, 54 of the 72 staff here were self-isolating, including the manager, Andrea. This is her first day back at work after having the virus herself.
when I was looking after my residents, I knew full well that, you know, it won't be long before I'll be presenting with symptoms of COVID-19. Does it stop me holding that resident's hand by the passing away? No, it doesn't, because that's the nature of my job and that's what I do. I care for people. So you care for people no matter what.
We now know more than 2,000 care homes in England have an outbreak of the virus. Here, there's no doubt lives could have been saved if action had been taken earlier.
The government should have said, right, OK, we're going to lock these care homes down, we're going to protect them, we're going to test the staff, we're going to test the residents, we're going to minimise this risk before it hits them. We're going to protect these people who fought a war for us. We're going to protect these vulnerable people because, you know what, that's the reason that me and you are here, because these people fought for our country. So let's look after them.
Yes, you think they were let down?
Yeah, I do. I think they was let down by the government.
New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has announced she will take a 20% pay cut. She said her ministers would take a similar salary reduction to recognise the financial difficulties faced by many New Zealanders. New Zealand has so far been really successful in fighting coronavirus. The number of new cases has fallen significantly and there have been 9 deaths across the whole country. They have a death rate of 2 per million of population compared to the death rate, to the UK's death rate of 178 per million. Well, let's talk now to one of the scientists who's been advising the New Zealand government, Dr. Susie Wiles, who is a microbiologist at the University of Auckland. Dr. Wiles, thank you very much for joining us here on BBC News. How much did the early lockdown of your country, how much was that key to your success at tackling the virus?
Oh, I think it was absolutely key. I mean, the Prime Minister was very clear that she wanted to move fast and move early, and so that's what she did.
And it began with a strategy, I think, of trying to suppress the curve of the infection, but then moved to a strategy of trying to eliminate it completely. Why?
Well, I guess the buzzword or the buzz phrase was flatten the curve, that if you spread out the number of infections, you can stop your health system from being overwhelmed. But it was clear that if we moved very early, because we're so, far away and we had a few weeks, I guess, to watch what was happening in other countries, we knew that if we moved early, we could actually do better than flatten the curve and actually stop the spread. And so that's been our strategy.
And so in terms of your lockdown, describe it.
Everybody but an essential worker, which are people involved in food production, people involved in healthcare, and those people involved in sort of services like, the electricity and various things, they're allowed to go to work. The rest of us are locked in our homes. I mean, we're not actually locked in our homes, but we're in lockdown. We can leave our home to go for, a walk or a bike ride. We can move locally or to access healthcare. But other than that we're supposed to stay home. And we're moving into week 4 now, and it was originally a 4-week lockdown, but we've been told that on Monday is when the government will decide what happens next.
What have you done about either New Zealand citizens coming home to New Zealand or international travellers visiting?
That's been a bit of an evolving situation. So recently people could come in but had to self-isolate. Then a little while ago it was only New Zealand citizens and residents who could come home, and now they are basically being met and essentially quarantined.
For how long?
2 weeks.
OK, that's interesting. So anyone flying into New Zealand during this lockdown period has got to be in quarantine for 14 days.
Yeah.
What's your view?
So it's been like that for a while, that anybody coming in was supposed to self-isolate at home, but the numbers were too great to be able to, put in an actual place. And then because those numbers have been dropping every day, now they're at a number where they can actually be managed. OK. Now, our British politicians have told us, where I'm broadcasting from this morning here in the UK, that they are constantly following the science. And they are flanked each day by public health officials and scientists. Is it the same in New Zealand? Was Jacinda Ardern following the science? Absolutely. So she has a chief science advisor who also, runs a group of chief science advisors for all the different ministries. And they've brought a group of us together who've been looking at the evidence. But what our Prime Minister was doing was looking at what different countries were doing and then seeing the countries that had it pretty much more under control than others. And so she was really clear that we wanted to minimise infections and death. And so those were the countries that we would follow rather than those that were having a much more difficult time of it, like Spain and Italy.
Sure. So can you remember what date you went into lockdown in New Zealand? The actual date?
Oh, it was 21 days ago, whatever that was. So 3 weeks ago, we went into lockdown, sometime in March.
Yeah.
Every day it feels like, what day are we in?
I know, absolutely. I'm just, obviously there are many, many differences between the population of the UK and the population of New Zealand, but I'm just contrasting. The UK went into partial lockdown on the 23rd of March, the night of Monday, the 23rd of March.
So we would have been a couple of days after that, I guess, because we were about a Wednesday, I think it was. Wednesday or midnight on Wednesday was the day.
Right, OK, so that's really interesting. Obviously, many, many differences between the demographics and the spread of the population in terms of, you've got islands, we're not exactly the same, but we are an island. But we were also looking at other countries, but our lockdown, some people suggest, came a little bit too late. I mean, the leader of the Labour Party today is suggesting that it was a bit too late.
Yes, but that's because your initial policy was the herd immunity policy. I mean, I'm from
Although
the UK.
our government denies that.
I watched Boris Johnson's discussion of what was going to happen, and he said, every family should expect to lose loved ones before their time. I mean, that was clearly what he said. Put people, try and protect the vulnerable.
Yeah, but that is a fact. That is a fact. Yeah. Families are losing loved ones before their time. It doesn't mean that herd immunity was the policy.
Oh. It certainly sounded like it, that basically try and protect as many people as you can, but allow the virus to infect the young so that they could go back to work. And that's very clearly a dangerous policy that several countries have tried, even if they haven't quite called it that. It's really clear that the sooner you act and the more you break the chains of transmission, then the faster you can get it under control.
The reason I asked about your Prime Minister following the scientists, and obviously you're one of those advisors, is are the scientists all coming up with the same science around the world, and it's the politicians who are interpreting it differently, or are different scientists in different parts of the world coming up with different evidence?
That's actually a really good question, because here in New Zealand we do have some people who are advocating for a different approach, and their approach is that we should be getting back, that are still, people who are still infected. The moment we start moving around, that virus will spread, and we'll start to see exponential spread. And that's what countries that have come out of those measures too soon have seen. Singapore, all sorts of countries are seeing this. So that's, we have to be in a position where the numbers of people with the virus are so low that spread can be stopped by contact tracing and other, the other measures that we have when we don't have a vaccine.
Yeah, really interesting. And finally, what do you think? I don't know if you want to answer this, but the fact that your Prime Minister has announced that she's taking a 20% pay cut.
Yeah. I'd like to see more leaders do that sort of thing, and business leaders. I'm an academic, so why don't those people in the universities who can afford it? I mean, more of us should be doing it, because this is a difficult time. There's no doubt that lockdowns are difficult economically, but it is the least worst of a bad scenario, because it's definitely clear that when you allow the virus to spread more than we have done, that it's even worse economically.
Grateful for your time. Really interesting. Thank you so much for talking to us.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Dr. Susie Wiles, who is a microbiologist at the University of Auckland and has been advising the New Zealand government on their coronavirus strategy. They have had 9 deaths in New Zealand. A 35-year-old man in Perth has become the first person in Australia to be jailed for breaking their social distancing laws that were introduced last month. He's called Jonathan David. He was sentenced to 6 months in jail after he snuck out of a mandatory 14-day isolation period in a hotel to visit his girlfriend. He'd flown to Perth from the state of Victoria in March, which required him to remain in quarantine for 14 days. But he was caught on CCTV, leaving through a fire exit. The magnificent sum of money that Captain Tom Moore has raised for the NHS across England and Wales. People have donated from all around the world, so he's hugely grateful to all of you. Evelyn emailed to say, I'm in tears watching this morning. Captain Moore is a fabulous gentleman and he deserves the praise and thanks from the nation. Ray says, what a wonderful achievement. Martin says, without a doubt, this man should be considered for a knighthood. And one more for now. Just watch Captain Tom hit the 5 million live on air. What a wonderful, fantastic gentleman. I had tears in my eyes, tears of joy watching. He deserves to be honoured by the Queen. Well done, Tom. Much love and respect. Now, despite the pandemic, people in South Korea have been voting in parliamentary elections. Hand sanitisers and plastic gloves are being provided, and voters are also asked to wear masks and maintain social distancing. It's taken a lot of preparation to get polling stations ready, but the government's reassured the 44 million eligible voters that it's safe to leave their homes. From Seoul, here's Laura Bicker.
This is an election like no other. Voters must wear masks, stand at least a metre apart. Their temperature is taken. They disinfect their hands and wear plastic gloves.
Well, these 2 days of early voting have seen a record turnout despite the ongoing pandemic. People are still coming here in their thousands to cast their vote. They're going into these little booths here with their plastic gloves. They mark their ballot and then put it in the box.
저도 그거 걱정을 했어요. I thought maybe the election should be postponed because people wouldn't turn up. But now that I'm here and see so many others, I am not worried.
I don't think we should be worried. This is about our right to vote.
Patients with coronavirus are also able to vote. Special polling booths have been set up outside treatment centres.
투표를 못할 거라고 생각하고 있어서.
This woman told us she was thankful for the opportunity. Campaigning during a pandemic requires some thought. Gone are the mass rallies, replaced by mostly masked encounters. Candidates whose main concern was once a slowing economy and stalled peace talks with North Korea have now had to show they're doing their bit to fight COVID-19. South Korea controlled the spiralling number of cases quickly and effectively, aggressively tracing and testing infected patients. The widely praised response has given President Moon's once embattled Democratic Party a boost. The opposition, however, credit the thousands of health professionals on the front lines. There are fears that holding an election could trigger a second wave of infections, but for now, South Korea is determined to prove what is possible during this pandemic. Laura Bicker, BBC News, Seoul.
Hello, this is BBC News with Victoria Derbyshire, the headlines from the UK and around the world. All care home residents and staff who have coronavirus symptoms in the UK will now be tested as the government tries to tackle the rising number of infections and deaths in care homes. President Trump suspends funding for the World Health Organization, accusing it of covering up the spread of the virus in China. The UK's Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, urges the government to show the public there is a plan and publish its strategy for ending the coronavirus lockdown. Nursery and primary schools have reopened across Denmark as the country gradually begins to ease coronavirus restrictions. And he set out to raise £1,000 for the NHS. Now he's topped 5 million. He did it live on air at about 9:30 this morning. Captain Tom smashes his target with the help of donations around the world. The stay-at-home message has been issued to people across Europe and much of the world. But what about those without a fixed address? In the UK, the government has said everyone sleeping rough will be found accommodation. But some charities say too many people are still on the streets. So what can be done to help those people in the middle of this public health crisis. Let's talk to Michelle Ferraris, who is from the Italian Federation of Organisations for Homeless People, and John Glackin, who is founder of the British homelessness charity Streets Kitchen. Good morning, both of you. Thank you very much for talking to us. Michelle, what is the scale of the homelessness problem across Italy in normal times?
Good morning. In normal time, in Italy, we have around 55,000 homeless people. Not all of them in the street, but all of them without a home. And so this is the normal scale before the coronavirus. Presently, the situation is not so clear. Definitely, we have not more places or in dormitory or shelter because few of them closed. Most of them opened, extended their opening time from the normal 10 hour to 24 hour. But no city has decided to open new dormitory because it was difficult. And this was the appeal, the alarm that we launched last week and a few weeks ago.
So what is the situation now? I mean, do you have any idea how many people are still sleeping outdoors during this crisis?
Probably the same number that it was before.
Really?
Maybe more. Yeah, because just a few cities organized a new kind of shelter, exceptional and extraordinary shelter for maybe few hundred people. But there are other shelters or dormitory that probably closed, or people that refuse to stay in the dormitory where they are. Because if you have a dormitory with 40, 60 people, where one or two of them are positive to COVID-19, they are asked and they are sent to the hospital, but all the other people that are inside, they should stay in quarantine. But if the quarantine is not organized and managed, maybe they want to go out and there's not a system to avoid this. So they are they went around and they are in the street. So it's not sure how much or how many people are actually on the street.
Understood.
And whether they are positive or they should stay in quarantine.
Yeah. John, hello.
Hi.
The British government promised to make sure everybody would be offered accommodation. Has that happened?
No, it hasn't happened. I mean, they made a big statement a few weeks ago that over a weekend they were going to get everybody in. Now, we knew at the time that wouldn't be the case, and it still isn't the case. And it's a credit to a lot of the councils and outreach workers. They really are trying very, very hard to get people in. But the beds aren't there. There's communication problems. I mean, also finding a lot of our homeless people is very tricky. I mean, to try and do this immediately. So, I mean, there's far too many people still out in the streets, rough sleeping. And the problem is, there is this feeling that all homeless people are indoors now, everything's safe. It's not. I mean, we're getting reports of people getting abused on the streets because people are saying, why are you on the streets? You know, there should be no homeless people. So, I mean, if
there aren't enough beds, John, let's think this through. I know some hotels potentially have offered to put a roof over the head for some homeless people. Where do you think these beds should be coming from then?
Well, it's quite apparent that, I mean, there's thousands and thousands of empty hotel rooms sitting in London at the moment that we could use immediately to put people into very adequate temporary accommodation. I mean, that is sitting there. I mean, it's a travesty, the amount of empty buildings that normal circumstances are around. I mean, there is plenty of places around. I mean, there's whole blocks of flats lying empty in Manchester and London, all over the place. I mean, there are empty buildings there.
Yeah. And so let me ask you, on the hotels idea, would you expect the hotels to offer their rooms for free?
Well, I'm presuming they're going to need some sort of security or some sort of cost. I mean, I don't think any of the hotels are actually giving them for free. They're actually charging for the rooms. So, I mean, in this economic crisis that we're in, I mean, it offers an opportunity for hotels to actually maybe keep their industry going slightly, you know, re-employ the cooks, re-employ the people back in there, and, you know, keep people working.
I've got a statement from the government here. They say over 90% of rough sleepers known to local authorities at the beginning of this crisis have now been made offers of safe accommodation, ensuring some of the most vulnerable in society are protected from the pandemic. This is the result of a collaborative effort across government and with local councils, health providers and charities, backed by £1.6 billion of government funding to help councils respond to the virus, including support for the most vulnerable. Michelle, can I go back to you? Is it true that Italian police have handed out fines to some homeless people on the streets during this crisis?
Yes, unfortunately, it happened at the beginning. Presently, probably it has reduced. It happened because the government said stay home. So everybody should stay home, but homeless people have not home. So they were fined into the street. And so we launched an appeal with a street lawyer, our associate, and we wrote to the minister to ask them not to do some special law, but just to ask the police and the people that has the order to look at the street, to verify the status of the people. And if someone is asked why they are on the street, and the answer is I'm in the street because I have not a home, just verify with the social services, and if it is true, bring them to some safe place and take care of them, but not finding them is unuseful and is a waste of time.
Okay. John, I want to ask you, do you have any concerns that the economic impact, I beg your pardon, of the lockdown in Britain might mean there are more homeless people in the long term?
Absolutely. I mean, that is the biggest problem I'm hearing from outreach, is this influx of new people coming to the streets. I mean, you've got, in London, I mean, you've lots of those tourist backpackers, hostels have all closed. You've got landlords who are kicking people out totally illegally. I mean, there's a lot of people.
Are you sure that's happening, John? Because, as you know, the government has put in place restrictions banning landlords from evicting people for 3 months.
I mean, that is correct. I mean, just to bring you back to what you said earlier about, I mean, I think it's a bit of an insult when the government say that 90% of people have been offered positions. I mean, I could offer you a steak dinner tonight, but it doesn't mean you're going to get one.
Yeah.
I mean, what we would need to hear about is the actual amount of beds that are there, and how do we steer people into them? This is a big problem that the grassroots groups are facing. We know there are beds there, but the communication problem of us trying to get people into beds is not there, and that needs to be improved.
Okay.
We are seeing lots new to the streets. I mean, there are illegal evictions occurring.
Definitely.
Yes.
And so where are those people going when they're evicted?
One doesn't know. They're going to the streets. I mean, this is the problem at the moment. All services are closed. Day centres are closed. Advisory services are closed. You go through the phones. It's very hard to get advice, and it's very hard to find out what is happening in the world. I mean, it's great to hear from our Italian friend there what's going on, because I wasn't very aware of what is happening in Italy on the streets. And people aren't very aware of what's happening in the UK on the streets, because this has not been reported.
Well, we're reporting it now. So thank you very much for coming on air. Thank you. John Glackin, founder of the UK homelessness charity Streets Kitchen. Thank you for your time. And Michelle Ferraris, spokesperson for the Italian Federation of Organisations for Homeless People. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Europe is still at the centre of a war, and relaxing lockdown measures too early could bring on a second wave of deadly coronavirus outbreaks. That's according to the World Health Organization. And that warning comes as some countries, including Austria and parts of Italy, begin easing restrictions. The WHO's regional director, Dr. Hans Klug, has been speaking to our global health correspondent, Tulip Mazumba.
It's a story of hope and of caution. Europe is still the pandemic epicenter globally. It's not a time to let the guard down. I have never seen such a devastation. Many of us have been surprised by the speed and also by the aggression of the virus.
The stark assessment from the man in charge of the World Health Organization's response to the pandemic in Europe. Dr. Hans Kluge told me that despite some very cautious optimism, the region's fight against COVID-19 is far from nearing an end.
We see, for example, in a number of countries like Sweden, there is a fresh surge. In Turkey, particularly Istanbul, is quite an increase of cases. In Belgium, Ukraine, Norway, the same. But then we have, for example, Germany, where there is no more increase in new cases.
If we can talk a little bit about what's happening here in the UK at the moment. Hundreds of deaths being reported every day, thousands of cases. This is a country with some of the world's top scientists, with an internationally celebrated health system. How has it got to this stage here?
This is something which can completely overwhelm the best health systems in the world. I would really welcome the decision by the government to expand the testing capacity. We know what has to be done. Let's do it.
Two of the worst hit countries in Europe, Italy and Spain, have just started easing some restrictions as the rate of infection continues to slow. What happens next? I mean, what do people do? Does life perhaps start getting back to some degree of normality or not?
This is indeed the biggest challenge that we are facing. It's a trade-off between going back to what we call the new normal and lifting the restrictive measures to ensure that there will be no second wave. It means that if we see that there is a second wave, quickly we can go back and contain. We have to take into account 4 factors. One is the epidemiology, and that's why it's so important to have expanded testing capacity, that we know to locate the virus. Second is the capacity of the health system. Are our nurses ready in case that we have another surge? The third very important factor are our people, the acceptability, because we know that such a lockdown has a very high toll. And the fourth one is to look forward to new technologies and hopefully new treatments and vaccines.
Europe remains in the midst of an unrelenting pandemic, but this is a global challenge which will only end if all countries pull together to bring these outbreaks under control. Tulip Mazumdar, BBC News.
This email from people who are watching in Spain. Thank you for keeping us updated. We're very proud of Captain Tom, says Jackie. What a great man. Can you tell us if Just Giving are waiving their standard fees on this great cause? That would be a good gesture. I actually don't know the answer to that. We need to support a campaign for Captain Tom getting a medal from the Queen. It would warm all our hearts. Stay safe and keep up the good work. And I can tell you that he has now raised over £5.5 million. So at 25 past, so let me see, an hour and a half ago, it reached 5 million. So in 90 minutes, another £500,000 has been donated by people around the world for Captain Tom's sponsored walk. Look at that, refreshing it as we go. It's going up all the time. That is a magnificent sum. Thank you to everybody around the world who has donated. Let's bring you the headlines here on BBC News. All care home residents and staff who have coronavirus symptoms in the UK will now be tested as the government tries to tackle the rising number of infections and deaths in care homes. President Trump suspends funding for the World Health Organization, accusing it of covering up the spread of the virus in China. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, urges the government to show the public there is a plan and publish its strategy for ending the coronavirus lockdown. President Trump has come under fire for suspending that funding to the World Health Organization. He accused it of failing to adequately assess the coronavirus outbreak when it first emerged in the Chinese city of Wuhan, even though Mr. Trump himself insisted the virus was a hoax until relatively recently. Now, America is the largest overall donor to the WHO, contributing just under 15% of its budget last year. Earlier, Richard Horton, who is the editor of the Lancet scientific journal, tweeted this, saying President Trump's decision is a crime against humanity and called on global solidarity against his betrayal. We can talk to Richard Horton now. Good morning. I can't hear you, so hopefully we're going to turn up your volume and make sure we definitely can hear you. Let's try again. Mr. Horton, hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you very well.
Perfect, we can hear you now. Thank you for talking to us. Why do you believe President Trump's decision is a crime against humanity, to use your words?
Well, the World Health Organization's primary role is to defend the health of the world's population. And a crime against humanity is a systematic attempt to hurt the health and well-being of a population. President Trump has clearly committed that crime. The World Health Organization is the world's only health agency. Its primary responsibility is to coordinate international activity to defend the health of people in the world, and to defund it in such a dramatic way is an appalling act that violates every principle of solidarity that we need more than ever today.
Are you saying it won't be able to defend the health of the world without the 15% that the USA contributes?
I think actually it's more than 15%. The US contributes about a fifth of the funding to WHO. WHO has already suffered major erosions to its funding in the last 2 decades. Its funding base is no more than a district general hospital in the United Kingdom, and yet it does incredibly important work in setting out technical advice to countries. This epidemic, this pandemic, is affecting almost every single country in the world. We need a super strong WHO right now to be able to provide that technical assistance to countries.
What about his point? Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Horton. What about his point that the WHO are too close to China and actually should have been criticising China at a time when they seem to be praising it?
This is a complete misreading of history. The Chinese authorities provided information about this new outbreak to the WHO office in Beijing on December the 31st. Immediately, that information was conveyed to Geneva. And in the early weeks of January, conversations took place between the Chinese authorities and WHO in Geneva to try and understand better what was taking place in Wuhan. The issue about person-to-person transmission that you mentioned is another red herring. At the very early stages of the outbreak, we really didn't know whether there was person-to-person transmission, and that was only proven scientifically in a publication that we actually published on January the 24th. So I think we need to not let history be rewritten by those such as President Trump, who would like to criticise WHO for his own personal political ends.
Thank you very much, Richard Horton of The Lancet. So he did it. A 99-year-old Army veteran, Captain Tom, has now raised more than £5 million for the NHS across the UK. He did it when we were live on air about an hour and a half ago by walking up and down in his garden. Now, Captain Tom initially hoped to raise £1,000. I was talking to him together with his daughter, Hannah Ingram Moore, and also Ellie Orton from the NHS Charities Together, which will benefit from the funds he's raised. The £5 million mark was reached when we were live on air. About 9:25. Captain Tom began by telling us how he felt about raising so much money.
I think that seemed absolutely enormous. At no time when we started off with this exercise did we anticipate we would get anything near that source of money. It just shows that people have such high regard for our members of our National Health Service, and it's really amazing that people have paid so much money. I understand, Victoria, you had some time in the hospital, and no doubt that you found exactly the same, that the service and care and attention that you got was out of this world.
It really was, Tom. The NHS saved my life, and I am grateful every single day. Ellie, let me bring in you. I wonder what you want to say to Tom about the money raised so far, which continues to keep going up. I'm still trying to get on his Just Giving page to refresh it to see what the latest is, but what would you like to say to him?
Well, absolutely huge thank you and amazing well done to Captain Tom and all his supporters and his family. This is teamwork on a grand scale with the ultimate team leader in Captain Tom.
So Ellie is from the charity that we're raising the money for, and she says an enormous thank you. And I just jump in, I've seen on TV this morning there's been calculations with the type of things that could be bought with the money that Tom's raised. And we, when it's put into context often like that, it becomes so real, and we are overwhelmed. We feel so humble, and we're so grateful to everyone who supported us.
Oh my gosh, it says here, look, I've got 2 phones and an iPad. It says 499,276.91. So it's almost there. But this isn't refreshing though. Oh my gosh.
Oh, just agony.
Yeah, but it's... Okay. I'm just waiting for my colleagues who have managed to get on.
Well done.
So how far did it go?
Oh, I think they've all crashed now.
We're within pounds of 5 million.
Right.
Not quite. They're counting it down. They're listening. So Victoria's listening in her ear. The site keeps crashing. So as soon as that she knows, she's going to tell us.
Right.
Oh my God, this is so frustrating. But it's only because of the generosity of people
Yes.
that it means that it's crashing. Goodness me. How is your hip doing, Tom?
How is your hip?
Well, at the moment...
Hang on, you've done it. You've done it. You've done it. You've done it. You've reached... People have donated over 5 million. Oh my gosh, you've done it, Tom. Woo! That is absolutely extraordinary.
Completely out of this world. Thank you so much for all you people who subscribe to the National Health Service, because for every penny that we get, they deserve every one of it.
They do.
Tom, you are an absolute legend. You have raised over £5 million for NHS charities together. Ellie, what's your reaction?
Well, it's just, I think what Hannah has to say is that, you know, words are now feeling like they're not coming. It is absolutely incredible. And I wish that I had a thesaurus in my brain to be able to express our gratitude and our huge admiration for you, Captain Tom, for the NHS, and for absolutely everybody who is donating and behind you and behind it supporting the NHS. So a massive thank you from me personally and from all of the NHS charities and staff that are caring for those COVID-19 patients. We have massive.
Want your brain better? Unlike ordinary memory supplements, Nariva has clinically proven ingredients that fuel 5 indicators of brain performance: memory, focus, accuracy, learning, and concentration. Try Nariva for 30 days and see the difference.
Take in fragrance inspired by nature with Airwick Essential Mist. Voted best innovation in air care, it transforms natural essential oils into mist. Experience the latest in air care by Airwick.
Staying at home means being online more than ever. Use NordVPN to protect yourself from cyber threats. Get the app today and work from home safely. NordVPN, online security for your private and business life.
So, what's your plan for retirement? See the world? See the grandkids? Keep doing what you love? However you plan to retire, you need to be prepared. Do you have a financial plan? Do you have a tax strategy? How much of your portfolio can you afford to withdraw? Learn more about these and 96 other retirement topics coming your way in this free guide from Fisher Investments.
Call now for Fisher's 99 retirement tips. Our free guide shows you helpful ways to make your retirement more enjoyable. It's sound advice for a more secure future. Call 1-800-880-5533.
You've worked years for a comfortable retirement. If your portfolio is over $500,000 and you want to make your retirement last, call now.
Get your free copy of 99 retirement tips today. Call 1-800-880-5533.
Don't just retire. Retire well.
Looking up through the glass ceiling, women probably see the undersides of a lot of things that aren't usually on public display.
Negotiation is the only way for peace in Afghanistan. So that's why we have started negotiation with the American side.
If you're ever caught doing anything racist, you should be banned for life, and that's just the end of it. So hopefully start to root out some of those fan groups.
As long as weapons of mass destruction exist, nuclear weapons, the danger is colossal.
I wouldn't be here right now sitting opposite you or speaking at the UN or any of these things if I hadn't made a big noise.
People have the right to protest. And we recognize that and we protect that right because that's part of our democracy.
When big names talk, they talk to the BBC.
This is BBC News with the latest headlines for viewers in the UK and around the world. All care home residents and staff who have COVID-19 symptoms in the UK will now be tested as the government tries to tackle the rising number of infections and deaths in care homes.
We've been working really hard to do whatever we can to protect those receiving care from this truly awful, horrible illness.
President Trump suspends funding for the World Health Organization, accusing it of covering up the spread of the virus in China.
The reality is that the WHO failed to adequately obtain, vet, and share information in a timely and transparent fashion.
The UK's Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer urges the government to show the public there is a plan and publish its strategy for ending the COVID-19 lockdown. Nursery and primary schools are reopened across Denmark as the country gradually begins to ease COVID-19 restrictions. And he set out to collect £1,000 for the NHS. Now he's topped 5 million. Veteran Captain Tom smashes his target with the help of the world.
Well, at the moment...
Hang on, you've done it! You've done it! You've done it! You've done it! You've reached... People have donated over 5 million. Oh my gosh, you've done it, Tom! Woo! That is absolutely extraordinary.
Completely out of this world.
Hello and welcome to audiences in the UK and around the world. We're covering all the latest COVID-19 developments here in Britain and globally. Our top story, the UK government has promised all care home residents and staff with COVID-19 symptoms will be tested. It comes after warnings from care providers that the virus is running wild amid the elderly and vulnerable. More than 2,000 care homes have confirmed outbreaks. So, that promise, the UK government has said once laboratory capacity increases, testing of all care home residents and staff with virus symptoms will begin. It's also said that the Care Quality Commission, which is coordinating the effort to ramp up testing in care homes, will offer tests to 30,000 care providers by the end of the week. Our other top developments today, international criticism is mounting against President Trump's decision to suspend funding for the World Health Organization while the COVID-19 pandemic is still raging. The UK Labour leader Keir Starmer has urged the government to go further and publish its exit strategy from the lockdown. Sir Keir called for more transparency about how and when the rules will be relaxed. In Denmark, the government has reopened daycare centres and primary schools after a month-long closure. Children are being kept further apart than usual, and where possible, lessons are to be held outside. Keith Doyle reports now on the situation in care homes in England and that news that residents and staff with symptoms will now be tested for COVID-19.
We'll be there with you.
With no family allowed to visit their care home, it's care workers that read the last messages from loved ones.
For now, Grandma, this is goodbye. But I know that you will always be with us in our hearts.
We've all got on with it and done what we can. And I can sleep well at night knowing that I did give them all the love and care that I could in their last moments.
The exact number of deaths of care home residents due to coronavirus is unclear. There has not been routine testing, something care homes have been calling for. The government has now said it will test all care home residents and staff in England with symptoms. It's also said all new residents discharged from hospital into care homes will be tested. Further details will be in the Social Care Action Plan to be revealed later this week, with 30,000 care providers expected to be contacted by the end of the week, according to the government. Deaths in care homes are not included in the official government figures. The latest number of deaths of people with COVID-19 in hospital has risen by 778, bringing the total to 12,107. The cost of the virus has also been laid bare. The economy could shrink by 35% by June, according to the Independent Office of Budget Responsibility, with the effects felt by everyone.
These are tough times, and there will be more to come. As I've said before, we can't protect every business and every household.
Labour says it's critical that the government gets the measures right, but MPs believe it's struggling to get some of them in place.
I've no doubt the government is being bold. It has come forward with the right basic approach, but because it's having to happen at pace and a great scope, it is clearly struggling in some areas.
Getting businesses back open, getting people back to work, getting care workers tested, getting through this pandemic. These are the challenges facing the government and the country in the weeks ahead. Keith Doyle, BBC News.
In the last half hour, North Middlesex University Hospital have confirmed the death of one of their nurses, Cheryl Williams, from COVID-19. In a statement, the hospital have said, "With greatest sadness, we can confirm the death of our much-loved colleague, Cheryl Williams. As a ward housekeeper on one of our care of the elderly wards, Cheryl was a linchpin of the care, comfort and compassion that our patients and local people value so highly, and her personal contribution to patient care is irreplaceable." They add, "We will miss her more than words can describe." President Trump has announced he is withholding funding for the World Health Organization, claiming it failed in its basic duty when responding to the pandemic. President Trump accused the organization of failing to investigate the outbreak in the Chinese city of Wuhan, where the virus emerged. In the last half hour, the EU's foreign minister has said he deeply regrets the funding freeze. Our North America correspondent Peter Bowes reports.
The President of the United States.
Addressing reporters in the Rose Garden at the White House, President Trump said the United States was making substantial progress against the coronavirus. He could see light at the end of the tunnel. But it was time to call an end to America's support for the World Health Organization.
Today I'm instructing my administration to halt funding of the World Health Organization while a review is conducted to assess the World Health Organization's role in severely mismanaging and covering up the spread of the coronavirus. Everybody knows what's going on there.
Mr. Trump said the WHO had promoted what he called China's disinformation, leading to a wider outbreak of the virus than would otherwise have occurred. He claimed the disease could have been contained at its source with very little death if the UN agency had objectively assessed the situation on the ground.
There was credible information to suspect human-to-human transmission in December 2019, which should have spurred the WHO to investigate immediately.
Responding to the president's announcement, the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said it's not the time to reduce the resources for the operations of the WHO or any other humanitarian organisation in the fight against the virus. It's my belief that the WHO must be supported, as it is absolutely critical to the world's efforts to win the war against COVID-19. Critics in Washington say the president is trying to deflect blame for the spread of the pandemic in the US. The Trump administration has been criticised for a lack of early testing for the virus and for playing down the threat of COVID-19. Peter Bowes, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Professor Anthony Costello from UCL's Institute for Global Health is the former director of the World Health Organization's Department of Maternal and Child Health, and he joins us live now from Yorkshire. Thank you very much for joining us. First of all, what is your reaction to that decision from Donald Trump?
Well, I think it's a political distraction from domestic criticism and also from President Obama's endorsement of Biden yesterday. On the facts, he's entirely wrong. If you look, China first announced a cluster of cases on the 31st of December. The next day, WHO set up an incident management support team. 3 days later, they announced it on social media and in technical journals. By the 10th of January, they had come out with technical guidance for all countries and also said, alongside other expert opinion, that there was limited evidence or no evidence of human-to-human transmission. That changed 3 days later when our own new and emerging virus expert committee agreed that there was very little evidence, but then there was a case in Thailand and 13 or 14 healthcare workers were infected in China. And the very next press conference, the WHO epidemiologist Maria Vankakova announced this. So it was clear that there was the threat of transmission at that stage. They were desperate to get into Wuhan. They were only allowed in by the Chinese with a country mission for 2 days a week later. Dr. Tedros flew to China to meet the president on the 28th. And asked for an international review team to go in, and that was only allowed in on February the 16th. So WHO has not hidden anything and has always shared information as soon as they've had it and shared the opinions of experts around the world. So I'm not quite sure why President Trump is doing this. And of course, it will do great damage both to America's reputation, but to all the countries that WHO is trying to support if it goes ahead.
In terms of the impact on what the WHO can do with funding being reduced in this way, and at this stage it's not forever. President Trump says there'll be a 60 to 90-day review in which they'll consider what they do next with funding. But it's a large chunk of the WHO's money. What impact will removing it have?
Well, if it goes ahead, and I'm not sure it will, I mean, WHO can certainly survive for a few months on its existing funds. But if it did stay in place, then it's going to affect their distribution of personal protective equipment and testing and training support all around the world. Remember that most of the poorer countries are only just starting their epidemics, and the potential catastrophe there needs all the support that they can get, and WHO is one of the few agencies doing that. It's also worth noting that on February the 4th, the WHO asked for $675 million to support the global campaign. When I spoke to Dr. Tedros personally a month later on March the 4th, I asked him how much he'd received and he told me $1.2 million. That's a month into the major explosion of this pandemic, $1.2 million. So this is the reality that they have to work under. They're grossly underfunded, in my view. And I don't think this announcement by President Trump is helpful. It's very damaging to America's reputation. And I believe actually it will be reversed.
When you say that in practical terms, cutting the money will have the effect on the ground, would have the effect on the ground were it to properly go through, of impacting on the distribution of personal protective equipment, would you say that it would directly cost lives?
Well, it could do in the longer run. I mean, WHO is very used to receiving delayed payments from countries. The US is the biggest country, wealthiest country in the world, so it gives the largest assessed contribution. Of course, Bill Gates and others give very large voluntary contributions. I imagine other countries will step up, as will other philanthropists. So in the immediate term, I don't think it will make a huge difference. But longer term, it could be extremely damaging to an agency that, in my view, is already grotesquely underfunded.
You did give a very clear breakdown of the steps along the way for the World Health Organization in assessing and sharing information. President Trump says that the disease could have been contained at its source if things had been done differently. Do you believe this disease could have been contained at its source if things, whoever is responsible, but if things had been done differently?
Well, I think he's referring to travel bans. And of course, all the expert advice to WHO's committees is that travel bans don't work. If they had implemented a travel ban from Wuhan, say in mid-January, it had already spread out to other provinces and had reached 17 other countries by around about the 21st of January. So I don't think travel bans work. President Trump had the option when they had their first case diagnosed near Seattle on January the 20th to introduce a travel ban around Washington state, but he didn't do that, nor did the UK ban Italian movement after we had cases come from Italy. So I think this is a bit of a red herring. Generally, these measures don't work. What would work and what did work in Korea was early testing. As soon as there was any sign of community transmission in Korea, they did 66,000 tests in a week. Unfortunately, in European states, the UK, and especially in the United States, they delayed testing for a long time, and hence we've seen this massive explosion of cases.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Professor Anthony Costello, former Director of the World Health Organization's Department of Maternal and Child Health. Thank you. The UK's opposition leader, Sir Keir Starmer, is urging the government to publish an exit strategy from the COVID-19 lockdown this week. It's expected to announce an extension to the lockdown on Thursday. Sir Keir said the Labour Party would back an extension, but that the government must be more open about how and when it will end. Our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, joins us now. There is a lot of pressure for there to be this sort of move. Norman, is the government continuing to resist it?
Well, they are for now. Their view is that to have a discussion about the exit strategy would frankly send contradictory messages to people, because you would in effect be saying to people, we want you to carry on with the lockdown, to stay where you are, while at the same time saying, let's have a chat about how we can ease the lockdown. And the fear is that would basically undermine the lockdown. So they are prepared to have the discussion, but frankly not now, added to which the science, they say, isn't there. They need more time for the modelling, the data, to come up with a coherent approach to an exit strategy. So I've no doubt in time they will want to engage with the opposition parties and with the general public and to set out a broad framework for how they're going to do this, because bluntly they'll want some political cover and support for this. Keir Starmer's view is that, well, actually now is the time, because if you want to retain public support, you've got to engage the public. You've got to give them a sense that there is a route out of it. So he was arguing that actually now is precisely the time to have this discussion.
We do need to take the public with us. We need the public to comply, and therefore they need to know that the government has a strategy for what comes next. And they need to know the government's planning for that. And I think if there's transparency and openness, you get the trust of the public. And if you get the trust of the public, it's like the compliance levels will go up. And that is a very good thing, because what the government is doing now to keep the infection rate down is the right thing, and we should support that.
The other issue, of course, is it's such a huge decision. Realistically, it's going to have to be a decision taken by the Prime Minister. As we know, Boris Johnson is still recuperating at Chequers. He'll probably be out of action for another week at the minimum, quite possibly weeks plural. So this decision, I suspect, will be put off until he is back and up and in charge. Meanwhile, the focus of the government obviously has to be on testing and trying to ramp up testing, particularly in care homes, following the increasingly alarming evidence we're hearing from the bosses of various care homes about the level of deaths and infections, with an announcement, as we've heard overnight, that in future all care home residents and staff who want to be tested can be tested, and all hospital people from hospital going into care homes will also be tested, whether or not they're showing symptoms of coronavirus. All well and good, of course, but as we know, there is a shortage of tests. The latest figures, I think, for Bank Holiday Monday were down at 14,000, and priority at the moment is still being given to NHS staff. So actually rolling out a big ramp up in care home testing seems quite a way down the line, albeit this morning the Care Minister, Helen Whately, was defending the government's approach to prioritising support in care homes.
My message to them is that we are doing, and we have been doing, everything we can to protect those really vulnerable people who are living in care homes or receiving care at home. We know those are some of the most vulnerable in our society. And from the moment it looked like coronavirus was coming our way, on my part as the care minister and working with the Department for Health and Social Care, local authorities and those thousands of care providers and their representatives, we've been working really hard to do whatever we can to protect those receiving care from this truly awful, horrible illness that is hitting the whole world and bringing the whole world to a standstill.
So, understandably, there has been a welcome from care home bosses for the government's aspiration to provide testing for everyone who needs it in a care home. Delivering it, of course, is another matter, because we're due to get to 25,000 tests a day by the middle of the month, maybe late in the month, but here we are 15th of April and we're still quite a long way off the pace, never mind getting to Matt Hancock's bigger target of 100,000 tests by the end of the month. So still a lot of pressure on the government to increase the level of testing available.
Norman. Well, joining me now is Martin Green, who's the Chief Executive of Care England, which is the leading representative body for small, medium and large care providers in England. Thank you very much for joining us. There has obviously been this development, this news that those in care homes will be tested as they want, but that is obviously dependent on capacity being increased, so it could be some time away. How do you react to this development?
Well, I'm really pleased that the government has now decided to make sure that testing of people in care homes, particularly those who are symptomatic, and also testing of staff is going to be significantly ramped up. This is something we have been asking for really since the pandemic began. We've also seen some of that starting. So we've seen some care home providers being asked to send staff for testing. Now, there is a massive logistical problem in how to, first of all, make sure that there is enough capacity for the enormous numbers of care home and also home care staff. And we also need to be mindful that the testing of residents will have to take place either within the care home, or indeed if people are being discharged from hospital, in the hospital before they arrive at the care home. So I don't underestimate the logistical challenges, but I do think it's really good that we have now got this firmly on the agenda and the government has a plan.
Lots of estimates are being put out there in terms of the number of people potentially affected in the care sector. You represent a large number of care homes. What are your best estimates in terms of the spread and the number of people in care homes who have possibly died directly as a result of COVID-19?
Well, certainly if we looked at the latest figures around deaths, we were into nearly 500 deaths. So that is a significant number. We've also heard about 2,000 care homes now have outbreaks of the virus. So I think you can see this is a major challenge. What we've got to do is, first of all, make sure that all the support that is needed for those care homes gets to them. So we need the PPE, and that has started to improve the distribution of PPE. We also need some very clear guidance from Public Health England about what level of PPE is to be used in what situations. And unfortunately, there has been conflicting guidance, and frankly, that is not good enough. What we need is some clear guidance, and we need also Public Health England to take responsibility for telling every bit of the system that this is the guidance that we will use. We then need to look at how we make sure that we get testing to both residents who are symptomatic, and that will have to be done on the basis of some kind of swab test. We're also conscious we don't want people necessarily going into care homes, so we have been on lockdown for a while in order to protect people. So hopefully the testing process will be enabled by staff, so the staff who are already in the care home should be able to do the testing. And if we can get some clarity about these issues, we'll be able to begin the process. It will be difficult, it will be complex. You know, one of the things I think people should acknowledge is that care homes are literally scattered everywhere in local communities. So it's not quite as easy as doing it in, for example, a large acute hospital. But there is certainly a great desire to get on with this. And the care home sector is really willing to support government to make sure that the targets that they've set are achieved.
You said at the beginning that you've been asking for testing on the scale that's now being promised. You've been asking for that since the pandemic began. Are you angry that things have come to this and that so many people have been put in a very vulnerable position, people who are already vulnerable?
Well, I certainly wish that the testing process had started a lot sooner, but I think talking about anger is not helpful in this situation. Let's start from the moment when we have got this clear commitment to testing. We in the care sector are absolutely ready to support the government and to make sure that this works. And I was pleased to hear that the Minister, Helen Whately, who I have to say has done a huge amount, has also said that she wants to see care homes as a priority. And I think it's really important to underline that care homes are full of the most vulnerable people, people who are most susceptible to this virus and to its implications. People who live in care homes have several health conditions, so every single one of them would be in the high-risk category. So that is why we should be prioritising care homes for this testing process.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Martin Green, Chief Executive of Care England. Let me just tell you that we're just hearing that the worldwide number of COVID-19 cases has now gone over 2 million recorded globally. The latest statistics, and they are shocking, more than 2 million COVID-19 cases now, 127,590 deaths worldwide, and the number of recovered patients, 491,765. Active, currently infected patients, 1,394,643. It's hard to get our heads around these statistics, isn't it? Each of those statistics is an individual, and those around them obviously dreadfully affected by what is happening. Well, let's take a look at some of the other developments around the world. In Spain, the number of COVID-19 related deaths in a day continues to fall. 523 people died in the last 24 hours compared with 567 the previous day. More than 18,500 people have now died in Spain. Authorities are continuing to hand out face masks to people in public areas. A day after extending a nationwide lockdown to the 3rd of May, the Indian government has announced plans to partially ease restrictions in some key industries, especially in rural areas. Workers in sectors such as agriculture, construction and coal production will be allowed to resume activity from the 20th of April, provided their place of work is not a virus hotspot. A 35-year-old man in Perth in Australia has become the first person there to be jailed for breaking new social distancing laws. Jonathan David was sentenced to 6 months in jail after he snuck out of a mandatory 14-day isolation period in a hotel to visit his girlfriend. He had flown to Perth from the state of Victoria in March, which required him to remain in quarantine for 14 days, but he was caught on CCTV leaving through a fire exit. In the past hour, the European Union has announced it will hold a fundraising conference next month to raise money for the development and distribution of a vaccine against COVID-19. Speaking in Brussels, the head of the EU Commission also said it was vital that European countries coordinate their plans before lifting national lockdowns. The World Health Organization's Director for Europe has told the BBC that the continent continues to be at the centre of what he called a full-blown war. Dr. Hans Kluge has been speaking to our global health correspondent, Tulip Mazumdar.
It's a story of hope and of caution. Europe is still the pandemic epicenter globally. It's not a time to let the guard down. I have never seen such a devastation. Many of us have been surprised by the speed and also by the aggression of the virus.
The stark assessment from the man in charge of the World Health Organization's response to the pandemic in Europe. Dr. Hans Kluge told me that despite some very cautious optimism, the region's fight against COVID-19 is far from nearing an end.
We see, for example, in a number of countries like Sweden, there is a fresh surge. In Turkey, particularly Istanbul, is quite an increase of cases. In Belgium, Ukraine, Norway, the same. But then we have, for example, Germany, where there is no more increase in new cases.
If we can talk a little bit about what's happening here in the UK at the moment. Hundreds of deaths being reported every day, thousands of cases. This is a country with some of the world's top scientists, with an internationally celebrated health system. How has it got to this stage here?
This is something which can completely overwhelm the best health systems in the world. I would really welcome the decision by the government to expand the testing capacity. We know what has to be done. Let's do it.
Two of the worst hit countries in Europe, Italy and Spain, have just started easing some restrictions as the rate of infection continues to slow. What happens next? I mean, what do people do? Does life perhaps start getting back to some degree of normality or not?
This is indeed the biggest challenge that we are facing. It's a trade-off between going back to what we call the new normal and lifting the restrictive measures to ensure that there will be no second wave. It means that if we see that there is a second wave, quickly we can go back and contain. We have to take into account 4 factors. One is the epidemiology, and that's why it's so important to have expanded testing capacity, that we know to locate the virus. Second is the capacity of the health system. Are our nurses ready in case that we have another surge? The third very important factor are our people, the acceptability, because we know that such a lockdown has a very high toll. And the fourth one is to look forward to new technologies and hopefully new treatments and vaccines.
Europe remains in the midst of an unrelenting pandemic, but this is a global challenge which will only end if all countries pull together to bring these outbreaks under control. Tulip Mazumdar, BBC News.
Denmark, one of the first countries in Europe to impose a lockdown, is easing restrictions from today. The lockdown in Denmark started in early March, with the schools closed on the 12th. 4 weeks later, children up to the age of 11 are returning to nurseries and schools as they reopen. Other restrictions on leisure venues and gatherings of more than 10 people will remain in place. Let's go live to Emma Firth, a journalist based in Copenhagen. Emma, thanks for joining us. Just tell us how it's going to work.
Well, children start going back from today, but it's really not going to be like your average day at school or nursery. There are lots of guidelines that teachers and pupils have to adhere to, and over the last week they've been busy trying to put those in place. So, for example, pupils will be sitting at desks 2 meters apart. The smaller children in nurseries, when they sit at a table, they also have to be 2 meters apart. The smallest children will be split into groups between 3 and 5, and they have to play with that same group of people every day. Most lessons and most play will be outside. Children and staff have to wash their hands every 2 hours at least, and staff have to help the younger pupils wash their hands even after they cough and they sneeze, before and after food. And they also have to clean down toys and clean down surfaces like door handles twice a day. The floor space as well in nurseries has also doubled the standard regulations. So some nurseries and kindergartens, my children's included, can't accept all children back right away. So they're accepting half back as of tomorrow. So things will feel very different as people start going back today.
And this is just for children up to the age of 11 for now, is it? Is there guidance or clear decision on what happens for the older kids?
No, all older children are still studying at home, and the summer exams have all been cancelled. The government actually held a press conference last night because they said figures are actually going even better than they had hoped for. So they hope to open up more than just schools in this first, primary schools and nurseries in this first phase. So we're waiting to hear what that will be. But the feeling is it will actually be businesses rather than the older children. But that remains to be seen.
And so, I mean, obviously every country looks eagerly to another country when they do something that indicates any sort of return to anything resembling normality. We can't use that word probably anymore. But in terms of how Denmark has got to this point, what were the strategies, what's deemed to have worked?
Well, it was almost 5 weeks ago, on the 12th of March, that this lockdown started, and it was a pretty much full lockdown that happened very quickly before any deaths of the coronavirus had occurred. The cases were starting to increase rapidly. So the Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, called this decisive and full lockdown, which people adhered to. A few days after that, the borders were closed. And a few days after that, pretty much all shops were closed, except those selling food and pharmacies. There have been police out and about. They can issue fines, but they've not actually had to do much of that. There can be gatherings of less than 10. There are posters around when you go to parks saying "Holla Ausstand," which means keep at a distance. But the Prime Minister said last night in her press conference that people had done well, people had kept to this, and because of that, hospital rates have been falling for almost 2 weeks now. There are currently 380 patients in hospital in Denmark, and that's in a country of a population of 5.6 million. And the death rate at the moment is 299 people. So people have really supported the government's tough lockdown, but people are understandably now wary about the next few weeks going back into society, how this will affect those rates.
You mentioned the Prime Minister. I just want to bring in some pictures, actually, of him welcoming some of the pupils, or her, sorry, welcoming some of the pupils returning to school. I think these are moving pictures. We'll see. OK, there we can get a flavour of what's happening in the classroom there with that social distancing that you describe. So, Emma, it's good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us. That positive development there in Denmark with primary school pupils returning to school today. Not all of them, as Emma was mentioning, because they've had to restrict the numbers in order to follow the social distancing rules. But there is movement and some start of things going back to somewhere near where they were before, although it is obviously going to be a very long time. And in terms of whether we ever return, how long it will be until we return to what we now call normal, is anybody's guess. Well, let's go back to events in the UK. The government has handed over £1 billion to UK firms as part of the COVID-19 business interruption loan scheme. UK Finance, which is overseeing the programme, says more than 28,000 applications have been received, but fewer than a quarter have so far been approved. The business group, the British Chambers of Commerce, has called for the loan scheme to be accelerated, with a survey suggesting only 2% of companies have successfully accessed the scheme. Let's talk to our personal finance correspondent, Simon Gompers. So, Simon, I mean, there was a lot of hope and excitement around the scheme when it was announced, but clearly there must be a lot of frustration now with people trying to access it. Just bring us up to date with the picture.
Well, as you say, businesses are clamouring for this money, which is dispensed by banks but backed by the government. So the government says it'll guarantee 80% of the loan values for small businesses, and that gives the banks the incentive, the freedom to lend the money where they might not otherwise have done so. But businesses are saying their applications are taking a long time. Some are finding they're not eligible, or they're applying through the wrong bank. And that means, whereas, we're talking about possibly a million businesses that might benefit from help schemes like this, as you say, there have been 28,000 applications, 6,000 have been successful. Now, it doesn't mean that all the rest of those 28,000 won't get through. Probably most of them will, but it's really the tip of the iceberg of firms that need help. I mean, the British Chambers of Commerce have said that 2% of a survey of their members had engaged successfully with this loan scheme. So that's a small proportion, and there are many more that need the money, and they need it now.
And so for so many, then, the reality of cash flow causing problems, whether it's immediate or soon in the future, what is the timescale for these businesses?
Well, it is pretty immediate because, if you're running a business, you tend to think in months often, and many businesses have the end of the month. Typically, it's this month. It's likely to be the 25th that they pay staff. So there's a big crunch coming. They're hoping for these tiding over loans, which typically have been worth around £185,000, the ones that have come through. So in the next 10 days or so, thousands of businesses are going to find that they're really under pressure for cash. and perhaps haven't yet got the help that they need.
How is the furlough system working? So many workers have now been furloughed.
Yeah, a new concept for many people. Furloughing means that you remain on the payroll, but you're sent home and told to stop working. And the way that operates is that the employer can then apply to the government for 80% of the employee's salary over 3 months, up to £2,500 a month. So that sounds great, but again, it's getting the thing up and running. And the Chambers of Commerce say that 2/3 of their members are waiting in line for this scheme to start operating, to get their applications in. As I said, they need to keep paying people, so they're paying them out of the cash they have or the loans they already have, and they're worried about how easy it will be to carry on over the weeks ahead. Applications going in perhaps later this month, and the money for this furloughing scheme unlikely to appear until later than that.
Thank you very much, Simon. Well, we still have a lot to learn about COVID-19, including why the virus seems to disproportionately affect people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds. More than a third of those seriously ill in hospital in England and Wales fall into those categories, according to analysis from the Intensive Care National Audit and Research Centre. As millions of Muslims across the UK prepare to observe the month of Ramadan, Anka Desai has been finding out how living conditions are making them particularly vulnerable to the virus.
Boys, it's ready!
Meet Kinza.
I forgot garlic bread today.
She lives with 9 people in the same home. Her husband and son, as well as her in-laws, 2 elderly parents and 4 brothers.
And on that bedroom just down there is my mother and father-in-law's bedroom.
It's a familiar scene. Living life under lockdown is a struggle.
Social distancing doesn't really happen here because we're all in one house together. I mean, everyone has their own room and whatnot, but it's just difficult to have like 2 meters between everyone. So my father-in-law is getting ready to go to work.
It's an issue faced by many British Asian households, often with 3 and sometimes 4 generations all under one roof.
I think we're all just giving each other space because everyone is normally so busy being out and now being home.
Of course, you can't go to the mosque.
Whereas normally everyone will get up at whatever time they do and make their own way to the mosque. But this time it's actually really nice, everyone praying together at home.
Although families have found a way to come together for the routine, it's the fear of the unexpected.
We know a few people who have passed away and unfortunately they have only been able to have 5 people at their funeral. As Muslims, we believe that if a Muslim who's passed away has 100 people who are practicing Muslims at their funeral, it's like their one-way ticket to heaven. Carrom board is a game that I would say a lot of British Asians would play during lockdown.
Despite their fears, this tight-knit family are finding their own way through lockdown, through kindness and keeping busy. Government figures suggest that cramped housing is more likely to be a problem amongst ethnic minority families. If we look at some of the figures, 30% of the UK Bangladeshi population live in overcrowded housing. Now that's in comparison to just 2% amongst the white British population. On the tightly packed streets of Bradford, local community leaders who are pulling together to fight the threat of COVID-19 see the issues faced firsthand.
The general issue is that the younger generations are a little bit relaxed about COVID and not so concerned. But the risk factor is when they go back into their households, there's a serious risk of them contaminating their parents, their grandparents.
And that's why there's potentially a greater danger to the families within these crowded houses, and why the Asian community is facing an extra challenge as it attempts to keep COVID-19 at bay. Well, Anka joins me now in the studio. Really interesting report from you there, Anka, and just really highlighting the difficulties, the concerns for people living in multi-generational households. Yeah, absolutely. Kinza was just one of a number of families we've spoken to over the course of the last few weeks, and multi-generational living is a key component of British Asian families. Often 3 to 4 generations are under one roof. A lot of them could be key workers. They could also be working in the takeaway industry. For example, the family there, Kinza's father-in-law runs a takeaway business, so he's often coming in and out. coming into contact potentially with a lot of people. So it is a challenge when you've got 9 people under one roof.
And the issue of funerals is obviously affecting everybody. It's very distressing for people not to be able to properly see their loved ones and say goodbye. But a very interesting point in your report about actually the important symbolism around a funeral for many.
Absolutely, yeah. So Muslims believe that if you have 100 or more people at a gathering, at a burial, then that person will go to heaven, as Kinza mentioned in that report as well. And it's significant because people will want to pay their last respects. And it goes across other British Asian faiths as well. If you look at the Sikh religion, Hinduism as well, a lot of people are struggling to have their nearest and dearest at the gatherings. My mother was even telling me that she had to watch one funeral online, for example. And it's quite an unusual experience for a lot of people from British Asian households.
And how are they dealing with that then? Because those things are going to affect people for a long time, aren't they?
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of people are often struggling to say farewell to somebody who might be stranded abroad as well. We've spoken to a lot of people, case studies who say that they've been stranded abroad, so someone's passed away in the family, they've been unable to say farewell to them, and that's taken an emotional toll. And it's something within the Asian community, a lot of people don't really talk about their mental health or their personal feelings a lot of the time. So it's essential that maybe people do learn to talk to each other and during these difficult times support each other as well.
Everybody's going to be dealing with different things, but everybody has emotions that, as you say, it's important to share, and feelings. Thank you, Anka. Well, for every death reported, there is, of course, a human cost for friends and families left behind. The grieving process is made worse because, as we were just mentioning, the restrictions on hospital visits and just limited numbers being allowed to attend funerals. Here in the UK, reporters from the BBC's Inside Out programme have been talking to families of COVID-19 victims who've shared their experience at this difficult time.
Kevin was small in stature, but certainly larger than life. You couldn't really walk up the street in Cockermouth with Kevin without having to stop every 5-10 yards to speak to somebody. Lorraine and I were able to go through to the hospital, but only Lorraine was allowed to go in to see Kevin, which she did over the weekend. On Monday, they phoned up to say he'd deteriorated a bit further and that he was running a high temperature, and they recommended that we didn't go to see him. And then sadly he passed later that night at about 10 p.m.
This may be for you the most heartbreaking and difficult time to have your loved one suffering from an illness that is affecting the whole world here alone. And I want to assure you that we are going to do our absolute utmost best to be the love to your loved one that you would be to them if you were here.
All right. Yep. Ready, steady, 90.
We're going to turn them when they need turning. We're going to clean them when they need cleaning. We'll talk to them, we'll hold their hand. Please know we have your loved ones in our hands and we will treat them like our own, and we will be your love to them.
On Wednesday, the 8th of April, my granddad was sadly found dead in his room in this care home. We, as his family, haven't seen him to hug him or anything in weeks. We only spoke to him through one of the windows, which I know is the case for a lot of families.
I'm not going to allow one of my residents, one of my amazingly beautiful residents, to die alone and die in pain. We will sit by them, we will comfort them, we will do everything we possibly can. And if family want to sit there and be with them in the last moments of their life, then that's fine. Family will be with them in the last moments of their life in a responsible and sensible way.
What's really difficult is now the funeral. It's not going to be the send-off everyone wants. It's going to be low numbers and, you know, it's only 20 minutes and there's no wake to raise a glass for him in his memory. And, you know, he was quite a lively character. He led a full life. He was a chef in the army and then he was a crane driver. We would love to get together and share these happy stories as you normally would when someone passes, but we're not going to get that opportunity, and it's heartbreaking.
I don't believe that people should be stopped from attending a funeral service altogether.
I know that so many families have been gutted that they haven't been able to hold a wake or a reception or really celebrate that person's life in the way that they would have wished. But there will come a time when we can meet together again, and I know that so many undertakers and funeral directors will work hard with families to provide a really meaningful and wonderful celebration of life.
we do plan, when all this is over, to have some sort of fitting memorial to Kevin in Cockermouth, judging by the support that we've had.
Remembering just some of those who have lost their lives and the difficulties for those who are around them. OK, let's get the situation in Brazil now. There are concerns the spread of disease in some communities could spiral as cases continue to rise. The country became the first in the southern hemisphere to record 1,000 deaths. More than 1,500 have now died, and there have been more than 25,000 confirmed cases. Numbers are expected, though, to be higher. The impact of COVID-19 in favelas, which are crowded and lack basic sanitation, is causing real concern. Joined now by Gustavo Ribeiro, co-founder of the English language news site The Brazilian Report. He joins us from Sao Paulo in Brazil. Thanks for joining us, Gustavo. Those numbers are still relatively low in comparison to other countries, obviously, that are further down the track. But how quickly is it spreading in Brazil?
Well, COVID-19 is the numbers are expected to skyrocket very soon. And the problem is we actually don't know the full extent of the outbreak here, because testing has been very low in Brazil. The authorities don't have enough material to run tests, and the scarcity of materials have led states and the federal government to direct tests only to severe cases. So we actually have no idea of the full, the real numbers. And even in Sao Paulo, for instance, the highest authority in the COVID-19 pandemic effort said that ideally we would test massively the population, but there's the ideal world and there's the real world, and Brazil just cannot run enough tests. We have been one of the countries with the lowest amount of testing, less than 300 tests per 1 million inhabitants. Even the US, which has been accused of testing very few people, have done it 30 times more than Brazil.
So what is being done to try to limit the spread?
Well, in Brazil, local governments have a lot of authority. So every single state in Brazil have adopted some sort of social isolation measure. The problem here is that the president has undermined these efforts. He has advised people to go about their business as usual. He has called the COVID-19 the sniffles, and he has said that it's more important to save the economy than actually to control the pandemic, which, once again, he has undermined almost on a daily basis. So
does that mean people are not then taking notice of the suggestion that they actually do stay at home?
No. Early in March, people were highly compliant with social isolation measures adopted by states. But in recent days, we have seen this compliance rate going way lower, and people are becoming just less worried about the outbreak. In Brazil, it also has to do with the fact that we have a very informal economy, and a lot of people depend on going out and working to making ends meet. So the government has been very slow to adopt economic measures to counter the effects of the pandemic, which also contributes to pushing people out of their homes.
Gustavo Ribeiro, stay safe. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Being stuck at home because of COVID-19 can bring plenty of worries about your health, finances and job. For dog owners, it also poses a more immediate concern: who will walk the dog? Well, help is at hand. Not all heroes wear capes, but it turns out some of them carry pooper scoopers. David Silito reports.
Dogs are just amazing. They are that rock that often people need.
The daily walk has, for many, come to an end, but thankfully help's at hand. Volunteers signing up with a charity that's now become a dog walking service.
During the COVID-19 crisis, we have redeployed our services to allow us volunteers that usually take on lots of different tasks to help people that are in vulnerable situations.
So we're really delighted by how people have come out to help in this time of need.
Dogs like Leo here. Each underdog volunteer is vetted, handovers are done at a safe distance, leads are cleaned, and the current understanding is that dogs don't spread the virus. But that's not everything.
Because there's no shortage of dogs needing a walk, and there's no shortage of volunteers who want to give them a walk. The issue, though... Yeah, Cleo, you want strawberry? These are strawberry. Is bringing them together. He'll be back soon. He'll be back soon.
So that's why the charity wants to get the word out, to reach people like Stephanie and Leo.
I found myself feeling extremely unwell for about 2 or 3 weeks, and I thought, gosh, what am I going to do? I can't take my dog Leo for a walk. And I found this wonderful charity online, and for me it's been an absolute lifesaver.
So we may be limited to just one walk a day, but hundreds of us are keen for a bit of canine company and a chance to help those who can't get out. David Siletto, BBC News.
Now, just before we say goodbye, I've got some amazing news to bring you. You know Captain Tom, who started out saying he wanted to raise £1,000 for the NHS by walking around his garden. He's 99, and here he is. This is what he's been doing since he said that he would do 100 laps of his garden in Bedfordshire in England, and he would raise money for the NHS. Well, he raised, the total kept going up. Earlier it went above 5 million. That was just like a couple of hours ago. Well, now it's gone over 6 million. So this is really obviously touching people at home as they watch money coming into, there he is, in his prime when he was a young man in the army, now 99, and he's still doing his bit. And he had this goal to raise the money before his 100th birthday, and here we go, he's done it, and so much more. He's now gone above £6 million raised for the NHS, that money coming in from all around the world. So a really brilliant achievement by him. We're all proud of you, Captain Tom, well done. And now we'll say goodbye to viewers on BBC World News. Bye-bye.
It's a challenging market. Edward Jones is well aware of that, which is why we're ready to listen and ready to help you find opportunity.
So, let's talk.
Edward Jones, it's time for investing to feel individual.
As someone with hearing loss, I know what a confusing and frustrating experience getting hearing aids can be. That's why I founded Lively. Affordable, high-quality hearing aids with all of the features you need, and none of the hassle.
I use Lively hearing aids, and it's been wonderful.
It's so light and so small.
But it's a fraction of the cost of the other devices.
They cost thousands less.
It's insanely user-friendly. You take the hearing test online, the doctor programs in the settings, you don't even need to go into an office.
They're delivered to your door in a few days, and you're up and running in no time.
It connects via Bluetooth to my phone.
You can stream music, and you can answer phone calls.
The audiologist was so incredible.
She's full of all kinds of little helpful hints.
I love it.
They're a game changer for me.
I feel like I could take on anything.
It feels great to be in control of my hearing.
Better hearing has never been this easy. Try Lively risk-free for 100 days. Visit listenlively.com.
Want to brain better? Unlike ordinary memory supplements, Nariva has clinically proven ingredients that fuel 5 indicators of brain performance: memory, focus, accuracy, learning, and concentration. Try Nariva for 30 days and see the difference.
I love a cozy night in. The only thing missing is you. That's why I trust eHarmony.
No one can connect you with high-quality singles like eHarmony. That's why every 14 minutes, someone finds love on eHarmony. Start free today.
Staying at home means being online more than ever. Use NordVPN to protect yourself from cyber threats. Get the app today and work from home safely. NordVPN, online security for your private and business life.
When we founded Tommy John, Tom was obsessed with how to make underwear truly comfortable.
So we reimagined comfort through fabric, fit, and function.
We use soft, breathable, lightweight fabric with stay-put waistbands that never dig and stretch where you need it. We made a women's line so comfortable there are no visible panty lines and no wedgies, guaranteed.
For a limited time, go to TommyJohn.com right now to get 25% off site-wide. Plus, we'll ship it to your door for free. That's TommyJohn.com. Log on now.
Today, Molly got dressed for a big night out. She asked her Stitch Fix stylist for jeans that fit just right. And these feel like they were made just for her. Let us find your perfect fit at StitchFix.com.
I sent your new prescription to the pharmacy.
Any idea how much it will cost?
I recommend GoodRx. You get free coupons to save on your prescriptions.
GoodRx. Smart.
Stop paying too much for your prescriptions. Thanks.
Download the free app today.
This is BBC News with the latest headlines for viewers in the UK and around the world. All care home residents and staff who have COVID-19 symptoms in the UK will now be tested as the government tries to tackle the rising number of infections and deaths in care homes.
We've been working really hard to do whatever we can to protect those receiving care from this truly awful, horrible illness.
President Trump suspends funding for the World Health Organization, accusing it of covering up the spread of the virus in China.
The reality is that the WHO failed to adequately obtain, vet, and share information in a timely and transparent fashion.
The UK's Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer urges the government to show the public there is a plan and publish its strategy for ending the COVID-19 lockdown. Nursery and primary schools have reopened across Denmark as the country gradually begins to ease COVID-19 restrictions. And he set out to collect £1,000 for the NHS. Now he's topped £6 million. Veteran Captain Tom smashes his target with the help of the world.
Well, at the moment...
Hang on, you've done it! You've done it! You've done it! You've done it! You've reached... People have donated over 5 million. Oh my gosh, you've done it, Tom! Woo! That is absolutely extraordinary.
Completely out of this world.
Hello, welcome to audiences in the UK and around the world. We're covering all the latest COVID-19 developments here in Britain and globally. Our top story, the UK government has promised that all care home residents and staff with COVID-19 symptoms will be tested. It comes after warnings from care providers that the virus is running wild among the elderly and vulnerable. More than 2,000 care homes have confirmed outbreaks. Our other top stories today, international criticism is mounting against President Trump's decision to suspend funding for the World Health Organization while the COVID-19 pandemic is still raging. The UK Labour leader, Keir Starmer, has urged the government to publish its exit strategy from the COVID-19 lockdown. Sir Keir called for more transparency about how and when the rules will be relaxed. And in Denmark, the government has reopened daycare centres and primary schools after a month-long closure. Children are being kept further apart than usual, and where possible, lessons are to be held outside. Let's start with the UK and speak to our assistant political editor, Norman Smith. Norman, over to you.
Well, Keir Starmer is calling for an answer to the big question, namely, how do we get out of here, demanding that the government publish an exit strategy this week or next. His reasoning being that to keep public support, he says, the government needs to be candid with people. It needs to give them a sense of how we can emerge, a sense of hope, if you like, and that will retain their support for the lockdown. He's also arguing that when we move to easing the lockdown, it's going to require a lot of planning and preparation. It may require a lot of investment to build vaccine centres and the like. Better to start now. And his argument is it's about transparency, to be clear and candid and honest with people. The government view is, well, that's all fine, but not now, because they say the science simply isn't there to provide the sort of clarity we need to formulate an exit strategy. But their real fear is if we all start discussing an exit strategy, that results in a bit of a confused message in terms of the current restrictions and lockdown. So if the government is on the one hand saying to people, we want you to carry on staying indoors, but at the same time, let's talk about how you can leave indoors, that could potentially be counterproductive to maintaining the lockdown. Not so, says Sakir. Better to have that discussion now.
We do need to take the public with us. We need the public to comply, and therefore they need to know that the government has a strategy for what comes next, and they need to know the government's planning for that. And I think if there's transparency and openness, you get the trust of the public. And if you get the trust of the public, it's like the compliance levels will go up. And that is a very good thing, because what the government is doing now to keep the infection rate down is the right thing, and we should support that.
Elsewhere, a lot of focus today still on care homes, following some of the stories that have been emerging from care home bosses about the level of infections and death rate in care homes, with the overnight announcement from the Health Secretary Matthew Hancock that he will endeavour to provide testing for all residents, all staff in care homes who display symptoms or who want a test, and also for those leaving hospital to go into care homes. Now, that has been applauded by care home providers, but with a big but. And the but is, are there enough tests to go round? And at the moment, the evidence is not, because so far only something like 500 care home workers have been tested. The number of tests on Bank Holiday Monday was down at 14,000, and of course priority is still being given to NHS workers. So although the aspiration to roll out testing for all care workers and residents is there, delivering on it is another matter altogether, albeit the Care Minister, Helen Whately, this morning was defending the priority she said had been given to the care sector.
My message to them is that we are doing, and we have been doing, everything we can to protect those really vulnerable people who are living in care homes or receiving care at home. We know those are some of the most vulnerable in our society. And from the moment it looked like coronavirus was coming our way, on my part as the Care Minister, I'm working with the Department of Health and Social Care, local authorities, and those thousands of care providers and their representatives. We've been working really hard to do whatever we can to protect those receiving care from this truly awful, horrible illness that is hitting the whole world and bringing the whole world to a standstill.
A further complication when it comes to testing in care homes is the care providers want their staff to be able to do the testing in the homes. And what they do not want is yet more people going into care homes to carry out testing, which of course carries with it the risk of infection. Now, how viable that is, we simply don't know. One other element which has been central to the whole argument around care homes is on the numbers, because at the moment the figures on death tolls in care homes are something like 2 weeks in arrears. They're only published weekly. Yesterday, we had a promise from the medical director of Public Health England, Yvonne Ridley, that they would try and move to daily figures. Sounds to me like that is proving quite difficult to do, because care homes are such diverse organisations, some obviously run by the private sector, some by charities, some by local councils. So I think the signs are we could still be some way off getting to daily death rates from care homes.
Norman, thank you very much. Breaking news to bring you. We're just hearing that the Tour de France has been postponed. It was scheduled for the 27th of June to the 19th of July. We're hearing it's going to be postponed to August the 29th to September the 20th. There you go, the tweet from Tour de France saying that the planned route will not be changed from Nice to Paris, but the dates have. And There's more information on their website. President Trump has announced he is withholding funding for the World Health Organization, claiming it failed in its basic duty when responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. President Trump accused the organization of failing to investigate the outbreak in the Chinese city of Wuhan, where the virus emerged. The European Union's foreign policy chief has said he deeply regrets the funding freeze. Our North America correspondent Peter Bowes reports.
The President of the United States.
Addressing reporters in the Rose Garden at the White House, President Trump said the United States was making substantial progress against the coronavirus. He could see light at the end of the tunnel. But it was time to call an end to America's support for the World Health Organization.
Today I'm instructing my administration to halt funding of the World Health Organization while a review is conducted to assess the World Health Organization's role in severely mismanaging and covering up the spread of the coronavirus. Everybody knows what's going on there.
Mr. Trump said the WHO had promoted what he called China's disinformation, leading to a wider outbreak of the virus than would otherwise have occurred. He claimed the disease could have been contained at its source with very little death if the UN agency had objectively assessed the situation on the ground.
There was credible information to suspect human-to-human transmission in December 2019, which should have spurred the WHO to investigate immediately.
Responding to the president's announcement, the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said it's not the time to reduce the resources for the operations of the WHO or any other humanitarian organisation in the fight against the virus. It's my belief that the WHO must be supported, as it is absolutely critical to the world's efforts to win the war against COVID-19. Critics in Washington say the president is trying to deflect blame for the spread of the pandemic in the US. The Trump administration has been criticised for a lack of early testing for the virus and for playing down the threat of COVID-19. Peter Bowes, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Let's go back to the news that the UK's opposition party leader Sir Keir Starmer is urging the government to publish an exit strategy from the COVID-19 lockdown this week. The government's expected to announce an extension to the lockdown on Thursday. Sir Keir said the Labour Party would back an extension, but the government should be more open about how and when it will end. Let's speak to the backbench Conservative MP Laura Trott, who's a member of the Health Select Committee. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Why won't the government publish an exit strategy? Just to say, as Sir Keir Starmer says, this is what needs to happen in order for the current position of lockdown to change, and this is how we are planning for it.
Of course, I understand that people would like to know when we're going to get out of that. But I think the government is absolutely right.
Sorry to interrupt you there, because it's not about when in terms of needing a date, it's what needs to happen for the strategy to start turning towards that.
Yes, of course. And I understand people's desire to have that. However, it's really not possible, I don't think, for a really conclusive plan to be drawn up unless you've reached the peak of the epidemic. And that is indeed what all the scientists are telling us today, that actually until we've reached the peak, until we understand the impact that the measures we're currently taking that are so difficult, how that's affected hospital admissions, the number of deaths, and how the NHS is coping with those, we can't really formulate a proper plan for how we're going to then exit the current restrictions that are in place.
So what planning is being done then?
Well, I think it's important, and I'm a member of the Health and Social Care Committee, and a part of that, I think it's very important to look at the various measures that could get us out of this. So looking at testing, looking at where we are with the antibody test, looking at where we are in terms of the technology that can be used. So I think all of those are aspects that we absolutely should interrogate for where the government is getting to. But I think expecting an exit plan when we are not at that peak stage yet is unrealistic. And I would respectfully say probably not best at this point.
So, OK, then, looking at the testing, looking at the antibody tests, looking at exactly where we are in the statistics, obviously these are things that have been much discussed. And the latest is that testing is going to be rolled out once there is the capacity for those in social care. And that is something that is obviously needed and has been called for. Yes. The capacity is nowhere near it, though, is it? Because the government said that by the end of this month there'll be 100,000 tests per day. It's currently about 14,000. In the care sector, there have been 500 tests, and the care sector still remains behind the NHS in terms of priority. So if you say that testing is one of the key criteria, does that give us some sense of where we are and how long this whole thing is going to take?
Well, the Health Secretary set out a very clear plan on testing. And as you say, this is ramping up. I think we were at 18,000 this weekend, and the target is to be 100,000 by the end of the month. And that, I think, will be key, both for NHS capacity, but also in terms of how we actually get out of this and make sure that we are in a position where we totally understand what is happening in the community.
And sorry to interrupt you again, because that is the target, and we keep being told that's the target. We've got 15 days to get to that target, and we're less than 20% of the way there. So is that target really realistic?
Well, that's one of the things that I and others will be asking the Health Secretary about at the Health Select Committee tomorrow. And I think it's important that we are on track for that, because that will be critical to our recovery. But the signals from the government is that everyone is working day and night to meet that target. And I look forward to hearing more about that from the Health Secretary tomorrow.
I'm about to speak to somebody from the care home sector, and one thing that bosses of care homes have been saying would be extremely helpful to them right now is if the VAT on personal protective equipment were dropped for care homes in the same way that it has been done for the NHS. Is that going to happen?
I don't know. I think it's an interesting proposal. I think everything and anything should be done to make sure that we have the PPE that is required in care homes. And I think there's been a monumental effort on behalf of the government to try and get that. I'm MP, as you mentioned, for Sevenoaks, and that's something I've been talking to my own care homes about. And actually the supply where we are is okay at the moment. And I think the government is doing a Herculean task in terms of shipping millions and millions of pieces of equipment out every day. But that needs to continue, and it needs to be robust over the coming weeks and months. And I think any and all suggestions should be taken into account to try and achieve that.
Laura Trott from the Health Select Committee, Conservative MP, thank you very much for joining us. Well, let's pick up on testing in care homes. I can go now to Sir David Behan, who's the Chief Executive of one of the UK's biggest care providers, HC1. Thank you very much for joining us. I don't know if you could hear Laura Trott just there, but how are you feeling now about where things are going in terms of what you're hearing from the government?
Well, I'm the executive chair rather than the chief executive, but that's not the important issue. We welcome the announcement today that staff and residents in care homes are going to be subject to testing. I think over the past few weeks we've been making the case for social care to be regarded as a priority alongside the NHS and to receive the same attention in relation to personal protective equipment and also in relation to testing. So today's announcement is incredibly welcome. I think it will do three things. Firstly, it will allow us to ensure that suspected cases of COVID-19 in care homes can be tested, and we know whether we're dealing with an outbreak or whether we're just dealing with some of the other illnesses that older people can be affected by. Secondly, it will allow us to give the assurance to staff as to whether they've got the virus and remove some of this anxiety that I think staff feel that they're going to pick up the virus and either take it into the care home and pass it on to residents, or, and this is one of the acute anxieties for care home staff, is that they'll take it home and pass it on to their own families. So this is hugely important.
Yeah, I mean, it is obviously hugely important for all of the reasons that you outline, but when is it actually going to happen? I mean, you don't know the answer to that. We don't know. I was just speaking to a Conservative MP from the Health Select Committee, but it could be some time off. And in the meantime, obviously, workers in the care sector are still vulnerable.
So they are, and I've been making this case about the heroism and the courage of care home workers coming into work and continuing to deliver the care to people in our homes over this period, which is why we've been asking for the testing. The issue now is, having made the commitment, the issue now will be are people being able to access the testing? And we were contacted last week by 2 local authorities in the northwest of England, East Cheshire and Tameside Authority offering the test. We were contacted over the bank holiday weekend by the regulator CQC, opening up some of the testing arrangements. And this confirmation today is really, really helpful. The challenge now is the delivery of that and making sure that those members of staff, priority will go to those who are self-isolating because they're either living with somebody who's COVID symptomatic or they themselves are COVID symptomatic. They'll be given the priority. So the conversation that we've been having is how can we ensure that the staff who work in our own organisation can get to those testing sites and begin to go through the testing regime. So we've gone from this being a matter of policy, governments have decided the policy, that's incredibly welcome. So the focus now goes on to the challenge of delivery. And the conversation you were having about the numbers and the ramping up become critical to ensuring that the staff in care homes and the residents can be tested as we go through this next stage. So the first stage of this was to agree the policy, and the second stage is going to be ensure that all those that need to be tested are indeed being tested as we go through the next days and weeks.
The virus has had quite a head start, hasn't it, being able to spread through care homes in the way that it has?
Yes, it has, and I think we need to understand more about transmission. One of the things that I feel quite strongly about is that care home staff are being quite outstanding in the service that they've been delivering over this past period. Social care doesn't get the same attention that the health service gets, and I understand that, but the role that care home staff play is fundamentally important. But whether staff are picking the virus up from being in the care home, or whether they're picking it up on their way to the care home, or whether they're picking up in their families, understanding the transmission of this virus is something we need to understand much better than we do at the present time. As many people have said, we're dealing with this for the first time. But this is one of the reasons why testing is important. It allows some of the tracking to be undertaken and understand much more effectively what the transmission of this virus actually is. So it's not just that this testing will save lives, protect staff, provide reassurance. It will help us to better understand the way this virus spreads from one person to another.
Sir David Behan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Away from COVID-19 for a moment, because today marks 75 years since British troops marched on the Bergen-Belsen Nazi concentration camp in northern Germany and liberated more than 50,000 prisoners. Approximately 120,000 people were imprisoned in the camp over its 5-year period. And although the number of people killed is unknown, it's estimated to be around 50,000 or more. The horrors of the camp and its liberation were documented on film and have become emblematic of Nazi crimes against humanity. Joe Heyman is the managing director of the Holocaust Educational Trust and joins us now, as does Susan Pollock, who survived Bergen-Belsen, and she joins us on the phone. Welcome, both of you. Susan, what are your thoughts and feelings today on this anniversary?
Well, two things. The first is enormous gratitude to the British Army, who liberated me and others on that fateful day, and possibly the following day, that was on the 15th of this month. And possibly, if they had come later, few of us would have survived. I mean, the conditions were so critical, and the British Army had fought hard to get to Belsen and were unprepared to see, as that film you mentioned.
How old were you when you were rescued from Bergen-Belsen, and how long had you been there?
I was 15 years old, coming up later on. I was still 14. And I wasn't very long in Belsen. I wouldn't have survived the conditions because it was just a death camp. The part that I was placed in was a completely devastated and neglected completely. It was just there to die and to suffer. I was there for about, I would say, hard to tell, I had no idea, but about a few weeks perhaps at the most, without any food, without any water, no hygiene, nothing.
So you came out after, as you say, not so long, but long enough for you to have seen the horrors of it. You were not yet 15. Shortly after you left, you were 15. What was it like emerging from that into a world where you, I guess, could suddenly start to think of a future?
That's excellent to actually consider that. The difficulties that most of us faced. We did not want to go back to the country that some of the countries, I'm from Hungary, collaborated with the Nazi government. And where could we go? I wanted to go to Israel. It wasn't Israel that, but I wasn't able to. I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't strong enough to help to clean the polluted waters there, the marshes. There was malaria and various other difficulties. But where could I go? That was very difficult. I was fortunate that I made in Sweden, I made a recovery, a physical recovery. And that allowed me to be taken to Canada.
Could you start to look forward immediately, or have you always been looking back as well?
I had always lived with that, but my concentration, my hopeful attitude towards the here and now shaped my life. I wanted to have a family, my children, realizing that my family were all murdered, except my brother survived, but with huge psychological problems.
Susan Pollock, thank you so much for sharing with us. If you're watching us on BBC...
Hello there, we'll take a quick look at the satellite picture first of all.
Amazon's got everything you need, and free shipping for all. Welcome, everyone.
Attention, please. It's time to put away your computers.